Wicking beds are like having a water tank under your garden. It's a raised garden bed with a waterproof lining that holds a reservoir of water at the bottom, from which water is drawn upwards like a wick through the soil and to the plant roots above. Wicking beds are great because they don't need to be watered as frequently. The water doesn't evaporate away as much, so they can save water, and they're good for plants because their roots grow deeper into the ground, and they don't tend to encourage weeds because the surface soil is a little drier. In short, wicking beds could be a good option for any range of things, from small issues such as lazy gardeners to very significant issues such as climate change. In this video, we'd like to share with you how we built our wicking beds. It may be that you too would like one in your community or your home garden someday. If so, we hope this story will be an inspiration but also a very practical support to show you what can be achieved by a small group of people. Day one began when our volunteers arrived with all their tools. We decided to build our wicking beds out of treated timber. It's what we could afford on our small ground. It resists termites, which happily munch timber in our area, and by making sure that the whole of the garden bed was lined with pond liner, we ensured that no preserving chemicals in the timber could leach into our garden soil. There are lots more materials you can make a wicking bed out of, and we've provided links to many of those for you in the resources below too. For really big garden beds like ours, we needed really thick pieces of timber. Soil and water can get really heavy if you have enough of it, so our beds needed to be really strong. We started slowly on the first day to make sure we had our ideas right about how to build our first garden bed. This took the whole day. Once we knew what we were doing, the other 3 beds were constructed on the second day. After planter box construction, we had already met lots of new neighbours. One of our new friends treated all the volunteer workers to an amazing feast at the end of the working day. On our 3rd day, we began the construction of the wicking part of the bed. First came a pond liner. We deliberately overestimated the size, so there was a little bit of extra folded in the bottom. You don't want to cut yourself short here. We folded the top and just tacked it around the edges, leaving just one section where the overflow drain would go later. Then we lined the bottom half of the bed with old carpet to protect the pond liner from the gravel that came next. We put about 10 centimetres of gravel in the bottom and then measured enough ag pipe so that it could curl around the garden bed comfortably. This ag pipe is important when you have a big garden bed because it allows you to fill it up quickly with water. The end of the ag pipe was joined onto a piece of PVC pipe with a 90-degree corner. The PVC pipe is where you fill your wicking bed with water, and it needs to reach the full height of the edge of the garden bed or slightly higher to let you access it with a hose. Once the pipe is in place and you have a lid on top to stop soil falling in, you can fill the remainder of the bottom half of your garden bed with gravel. The maximum height of your gravel is 30 centimetres. Wicking doesn't seem to wick well for greater depths. It's also important to have a bit of a dip in the gravel to allow some of the soil to dip into the water and act like a straw to allow wicking to occur when the water level gets lower. We made our dip in the middle. You can see here that we have used 2 pieces of timber to demonstrate the differences in height. Next, you need an overflow pipe so that your whole garden bed won't flood if it rains a lot. The overflow needs to be the same height as the top of the gravel layer. We used a tank outlet fitting we found at a local hardware store. We used silicone to seal everything so that there were no leaks out of the pond liner. We covered the inside of the overflow pipe with a small piece of mosquito net to stop any mozzies breeding inside the garden water and to ensure that the gravel didn't fall out of our overflow hole. The next stage was to cover the gravel layer in a sheet of geotech material. This is material that lets water through but ensures soil cannot, so that your gravel doesn't get clogged up. Finally, it was time for the soil itself. We got lots of help from some big and small people. We used a good quality loam, which we got delivered right next to the garden beds on the street. The maximum height you want your soil to be is 30 centimetres, or it won't be able to wick properly. Once the soil was in the bed, it was important not to get too excited and plant our plants in it straight away. Soil can settle quite a lot, depending on what type it is, so we left our beds alone for a couple of weeks just to make sure we got the final quantity right. What we did do in the meantime was fill up the bottom of our beds with water to allow the soil to start wicking. Here's the water coming out of our overflow pipe for the first time, and no leaks. A pretty successful end of the day by Team Islington again. Finally, the big day and the plants arrived. We got some extra help to turn over the soil before we began planting. We selected a mixture of flowers, herbs and vegetables just to see how different sorts of plants would go in the rather warm weather we can sometimes have over summer. And then we got down to some serious planting, meeting some new friends along the way too. The trick to planting in wicking beds is not to dig too deeply, less than 30 centimetres, or not to select plants whose roots will grow too deep, or you may puncture the geotech liner that separates the gravel from the soil above it. Other than that, it's gardening as usual, without having to water as often. This is what our garden beds look like at the end of the planting day. A quick watering in just until their roots settle in for a week or so, and they're ready to grow. And this is how they've grown in the last 3 months. Since their completion, we've been through some really hot summer days and a flood too. The plants are thriving and the garden beds didn't drown. They're looking beautiful and are definitely an asset to the streets where they're located. A local architect business around the corner has even volunteered to help us develop a beautiful design for the outsides of the beds. The idea is to stencil patterns on each bed, but for each bed to remain a living art piece that anyone in the community can add to over time. If we do get some graffiti, there's no big problem because it just becomes a part of the next layer, adding to a rich bed of stories from all the people that will use and enjoy our garden beds over the many coming years.